Morning. Good morning, everybody. I think we have enough of a quorum to start. We have the president scheduled to be sensitive about, and so he's anticipating about now. So my suggestion is, Gary, that we start about now.
Yeah.
I officially call the second meeting of the President's Export Council to order. Before we get into our business today, I would just like to review very quickly progress on the 4 recommendations we made last time. You recall the 4 letters that were introduced and discussed and then submitted to the President from the PEC. First, export controls. And you may have seen already this morning the President has made an announcement on a valuable step forward there. And I think he'll make further comment about that in his remarks. But the administration obviously gets high marks for both initiating and moving quickly on this one. It's a big deal. Major steps have been taken in India. There's been the creation of a uniform export enforcement coordination center, ratification of the U.S.-UK, U.S.-Australia defense cooperation treaties, which has a lot of this export control language prototyped in it. And we'd like to keep up the momentum, but the administration is clearly working very hard to modernize this archaic system. Remember, this is the one that doesn't let you export stuff from Radio Shack to any place around the world because of a archaic drawing of lines during technological eras eons ago. 2, good progress is also being made on the Veterans Retraining Initiative. Bill Haidt and his leadership has been absolutely critical there. And it's my understanding that the First Lady's office has taken this challenge on, both to help drive it and support it, pulling together multiple agencies to help our returning vets. And in late October, the Department of Labor released a veterans hiring toolkit for employers to make it easier for employers to put vets on their payrolls. And we look forward to more initiatives in this area. On the free trade agreements, which was the 3rd thing we highlighted at the last meeting, obviously, and I think Ambassador Kirk is with us, just terrific, a terrific development with the completion of negotiations on the FTA with Korea, which is the biggest, most important, has the most immediate and long-lasting impact on exports, has been concluded. Congressional approval lies in front of us, and I know Ambassador Kirk is going to depend on all of us to facilitate, support, and aid that process. This is a really important step in the right direction, and hopefully we can get congressional approval expeditiously and move on to Panama, Colombia, and also beyond that one. Ambassador Kirk was talking to the Business Roundtable yesterday, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is one that looms beyond there, which has more of a Korea size to it in terms of its importance. And then 4th, promoting tourism. And I think it's fair to say on this one, it's still slow going. And I think Dick gave us a quick report this morning, which suggested that the thought is right, but the action is slow to come, particularly as it relates to visas. Dick, do you have a quick comment there? No. Yeah, we got to get going on this one. Yeah, I mean, you cited this morning the diverging travel trends, outbound tourism up, inbound tourism down, and also business-related movements of the same kind of people also troubling. It makes us a lot less competitive. And it's simple things like people can't come in and inspect goods that we want to sell them. I mean, you can't. It takes a long time to get a visa from some of these places, and we got to keep focused on that one. So that's just a quick update on the 4. Gary and Ursula, to call on Gary and Ursula. Gary, do you have any comments to make?
If you want, I'll give you a little bit of overview.
That'd be
Great.
terrific.
Well, thanks a lot, Jim and
Ursula.
Thanks for chairing and co-chairing this council, and appreciate everyone traveling great distances and taking time out of your very busy schedules to serve on the President's Export Council, which is absolutely critical. And the President and the administration are working very earnestly, full bore, to achieve his goal of doubling U.S. exports over the next 5 years, supporting several million new jobs in the process. I want to give you just a very brief snapshot of our progress since the last meeting, and Jim, you highlighted some of those. Exports are a big part of the economic recovery that is taking hold. In fact, exports really accounted for half of the GDP growth in the last year. And through September, exports are up 18% over the same period a year ago. Exports of manufactured goods are up 22% over the period a year ago. Agricultural exports are up 15%, second highest in U.S. history, and perhaps we're expecting that to perhaps exceed the all-time high next year. I know that Dick talked a little bit this morning. Dick Friedman talked about the travel issue. A lot more work needs to be done there, but actually foreign travel into the United States is up 11% this year over comparable period last year. Actually an export that has a positive trade balance, and so we need to keep working on that, and I'll have more to say about visas in a moment. Our Advocacy Center, which involves a whole host of different agencies, reports export content of about $13.4 billion so far this year. That's the export content of goods and services that are being sold around the world that our Advocacy Center has helped U.S. companies secure. And that has supported some 72,000 jobs. To build on the success that we're all seeing, as you know, the President announced progress on the Korea Free Trade Agreement, and I think the President will speak a little bit about that, but also Ambassador Kirk in a few minutes. At Commerce Department this week, we launched 2 new export initiatives that I just want to mention briefly. The first is a partnership with the National Association of Manufacturers, which is part of our new Market Exporter Initiative. 58% of all U.S. companies that export to only one country, typically Mexico or Canada. Many of the big companies represented here have very sophisticated marketing staffs, and you do a great job of selling, and we also try to help through all the different federal agencies supporting your efforts. But we need to provide the services of the federal government to those small, medium-sized companies that don't have marketing staffs. And so we're reaching out with the National Association of Manufacturers. They're going to identify 500 of some of their best small and medium-sized firms, and they're going to partner with us and FedEx to help them expand into additional markets. We're actually doing this with other private sector companies. UPS, they're identifying some 8,000 of their best customers right now that only export to 1 or 2 countries, and our goal is to work with them through all the different federal agencies to inform those identified customers of the incredible opportunities to sell their goods and services around the world. And of course, UPS says that for every 8 packages that they're able to ship each day, additional 8 packages a day, that accounts for 1 new job. So it's good for American companies, good for our carriers as well. We also launched a new Renewable Energy Advisory Committee through the TPCC, and also a Renewable Energy Efficiency Export Initiative. And we're going to be dealing with a full array of issues facing renewable energy and energy efficiency companies, including more tailored export financing through XM, OPIC, and USTDA. We're going to be knocking down trade access barriers specific to energy companies, and much more aggressive trade promotion. We talked a little bit this morning at the breakfast, and Dick Friedman just mentioned some concerns about visas. Yes, we do have to work harder to knock down those barriers and expedite the process, but I do want to say that the State Department, Homeland Security, and Commerce are in fact trying to address this issue. But so far over the last 5 years, visa issuances for business and tourism travel is actually up 15% in Brazil, 37% in China, and 6% in India. And these combined visa issuances in these countries are actually twice what they were 5 years ago. But we do have a problem of reducing the wait time to get those visas. And we know that that's a major impediment to encouraging that foreign travel for business or pleasure into the United States. And that's, right now we have a positive trade surplus in that area. We still have to do a lot more. So with that, I'll stop and turn it over Back to you, Jim.
Yes, thank you. And Mr. Secretary, just again, we just want to thank you for your sponsorship, support, and leadership, the whole PEC. I don't think all the PEC members know the degree to which your leadership and the support of your staff really makes a huge difference here, so thank you. Just want to mention that. Just one housekeeping item before I ask Ursula to make some comments. Because we're webcast, sort of rustling of papers, cell phones on desks, just be a little bit sensitive to that. Some of the technicians are picking up some of the sensitive stuff. So, Ursula, turn it over to you for some remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks to the staff of the PEC members who are carrying a lot of the weight for us. The pleasant thing about this is that we're off to a fast start. And today's discussion regarding exports, I think, and the benefits of export and trade is timely, very timely. We were at breakfast this morning hosted by the Import-Export Bank, or Export-Import Bank. Thank you very much for that. And what we've heard was that the economy is picking up a bit, which is good news, more outside the United States than in. And that, I think, imbalance, that difference is important to understand, and it makes this effort that we are involved with extremely important and very timely. What we'll see today, and including the last meeting, is that we're making a good start and a fast start on recommendations, and the administration is working hard as well to make this a little bit an easier path for us, notably the Korea Free Trade Agreement, which will help. I know it still has work to do, but it's a good start and a good indicator there. And as I said earlier, I commend all the subcommittees, and we should just continue working. So,
thanks, Ursula, and thanks for your leadership. Appreciate it very much. Just in line with what Ursula just said, the initiatives that were proposed last time, combined with the ones that we're going to discuss today, including some of Gene's work, and Gene's here on the small and medium-sized businesses. Just to frame it, we're working on about $350 billion, hard recommendations on about $350 billion of impact. That's where we'll be at the end of today, and which is not to suggest that it's all done. But it does say we've got it in focus, we're moving forward, we're tied in with the leadership here in Washington to try to make it happen. And so I'll try to keep a running count as we go along. And eventually, I know someone's going to ask me, some of the harder bitten CEOs on this group are going to say, Jim, show me that the dogs are eating the dog food. I mean, let's count. Let's count, and we will count.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to see how we're doing. But 350 billion of opportunity, and that's framed against our base level of 1.5 trillion. That's the base level to double. Okay, that was last year's export total. So we're beginning to work on enough to make a difference. And as Gary said, just some of the underlying strength of the economy and the work that's being done at Commerce and State to support commercial activity, already beginning to see some export movement. So with that in mind, if it's all right, I'd like to move on to the 4 letters of recommendation that we have for today. And I think Bob Iger is going to talk about IPR, and then I'd like to ask Member Reichert to make a comment when he's done, because I think So Bob, you tee up the salient points, sure, and then submit the letter, and then we'll have Congressman Reichert make a comment, and then we'll vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for your support for this letter. I think we all know the protection of intellectual property and patents are important elements in increasing exports, and I very much appreciate your willingness to move this forward. Additionally, I want to thank Congressman Reichert and Jeff Kindler of Pfizer and their staff for their work on drafting this letter. I'd also like to commend the administration for their efforts to develop an effective means of attacking the high levels of intellectual property rights infringement. Under this administration, we now have an intellectual property enforcement coordinator who worked with other senior officials in the administration to release a pretty ambitious intellectual property enforcement plan, and we're grateful for this plan and look forward to it being implemented. A November 2009 study by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development concluded that in 2007, the international trade in counterfeit and pirated goods could have amounted to about $250 billion, more than double the estimate in 2000. And that is approaching 2% of world trade. Nevertheless, despite these numbers, there's been little progress that's been made to stem the tide of copyright infringement. Foreign sales and exports of the companies in the most copyright-intensive sectors of our economy amounted to some $126 billion in 2007. And however, as stated in the letter, the biggest obstacle to further growth of these exports is due to too many foreign markets being flooded with too many illicit goods: music, television programs, publications, video games, software, etc. And too many of our trading partners are simply not responding adequately to this growing problem. And while there needs to be a long-term, sustained effort in combating this problem, the letter outlines several very specific short-term opportunities and initiatives. Continue to empower the Intellectual Property Enforcement Coordinator and work with Congress to ensure she has adequate resources and authority to effectively coordinate the government's efforts. Ensure the U.S. government continues to negotiate and implement bilateral and multilateral trade agreements with strong IP provisions that build upon and do not diminish existing U.S. trade agreements. Work to shut down overseas websites and that sell counterfeit goods and facilitate digital theft. And ensure that IP attaché programs within executive agencies, including the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, Department of Justice, and Department of Homeland Security directorates, are robust and coordinated, and work with Congress to expand these programs into additional countries abroad. So I want to thank you all for your support. I would ask that this letter be agreed to by the Council and then sent to the President.
Thanks very much, Bob. Would you like to kick off the discussion, Congressman Riker?
Well, I'll be brief. Happy to be a part of putting the
Thank you for your
draft together.
contribution.
And I'll take the moment to at least to recognize the ambassador and his great achievement here this past week in his efforts in Korea, and he's working in Colombia and Panama. I think it's very exciting news. Trade is, of course, I think one of the most important things we can do to double exports, but I think the second best thing we can do is to protect intellectual properties. And most people think that when you think about protecting intellectual properties across the world, you're thinking of larger corporations, technology, and 2 million Microsoft workers and that sort of thing. Gary Locke and I come from Washington State. We've known each other a long time. There's a company in Tacoma called Brown and Haley Candy Company. They make almond roca. And most often you see it around during the holiday season. Well, we had a meeting here not too long ago, and Brown and Haley presented a box of almond roca candy that was a knockoff box from China. And so we were a little bit surprised at that, but they're a smaller company, but they're suffering the same thing that some of the larger companies are. So what we really wanted to make this point, and we really wanted to emphasize the need that and I liked your comment, Jim, about the dogs eating the dog food, because I think it boils down to we're making an effort here, but do we have some performance measures? Do we have measurables? And that's the point I wanted to make, is to make sure that we're measuring our progress as we go along, that the strategies that we're employing and applying right now, applying to this effort, are actually working. So I appreciate the time. Take a moment to say something.
Thank you very much for your contribution and support and comments. I think Bob's letter and his discussion stand on their own, but are there any questions or any discussions before we take a vote on the letter? Any additional comments?
Ambassador Kirk.
Ambassador, yeah, I'm sorry, can't see it.
First of all, thank you all for your comments about Korea, and I think the President is going to speak to that. But lost in the, I think the deserved attention we've gotten over Korea, we had I think equally important achievement in this area in particular, and I want to highlight Ambassador Marion Shapiro from office, who's sitting behind me, but she led a team in successfully concluding the Anti-Counterfeiting Trade Act negotiations, which have been going on for 10 months, and nothing's probably as relevant to this particular area than what we've done in that, and that's going to make a big difference in getting some of the other important market economies that have the strongest intellectual property rights and enforcement. So I just wanted to highlight that for you. There's been a number of countries that began to formally sign it, but of particular importance, we, after a lot of very difficult work, we're able to bridge our differences with the European Union to get them into it. Between the U.S. and the EU, we probably account for, significantly more than half of the important intellectual property work products. And also to amplify the Congressman's point of the importance of this to small businesses. Of the roundtables we've done around the country, Gina, the single biggest fear we get from small businesses about exporting is that they cannot survive the theft of their property the way, and I'm not saying Boeing or others of you could survive that. You take a hit to EPS, if you're Alman Roca, you're out of business. And that affects their decision on how robustly they're gonna maybe pursue exporting if we can't protect that. So we're gonna continue to do it. I would encourage you, I've noted the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The beauty of that is for the first time we're starting with a blank sheet of paper, and at least our intent is to be as aspirational as we can in this agreement that we hope will ultimately become the free trade agreement of the entire Asia Pacific, and all of you know the importance of that region. So I would just urge you to maybe to have you or your teams visit with us so that we can incorporate your thoughts in terms of what we're doing. The IPR protections within that will be critically important.
Okay. We'll make sure we do that, Ambassador. Bob?
2 quick points. One, we've designated for each embassy an individual who will serve as the officer in charge. So every embassy will have someone's people out there. Contact them. They are supposed to be honest. And if you do have problems, email me and I'll make sure it gets to that individual, because this is an enormous priority. It's a priority now for current jobs, but it's also our future, since our future is in knowledge-intensive industries. From the entertainment industry to the computer industry to software, virtually everything has a knowledge base, and a lot of it is very vulnerable to piracy or forced transfer of intellectual property. And that's the second point I wanted to get to. There are more and more devices around the world, China being the sort of the country that's most engaged in some of these adverse practices, where it's not simply the piracy, which is a problem, but it is forcing you to transfer intellectual property as a precondition for doing business, or giving preference to intellectual property produced in their country as opposed to from the United States. And we've been making an enormous effort, particularly with the Chinese. The president has made this point, the secretary, and many others, Gary and Ron and many others have made this point as well. So we're looking at a wide range of intellectual property, theft, coercion, piracy, and we have to combat the whole panoply of issues. It's becoming more complicated, but also far more urgent in terms of our own economic future.
Okay. The opportunity is huge if we can build on those starts, and we'll make sure that your organizations are fully briefed on our recommendations, and we'll solicit also your perspectives on what we're proposing to do.
Can I just make one other brief adjunct to that, since Bob mentioned China? Secretary Locke and I will be hosting the Chinese during our joint Commission of Commerce and Trade next week. The issue of intellectual property right protection, I just want to assure you, is always one of the top issues of discussion for us with them. The Chinese perhaps are more sensitive to feedback from those businesses of you that are invested in China, perhaps in any other country. I would tell you the good news, they have launched a 6-month campaign to really highlight the importance of intellectual property and enforcement. The challenge is we need for them to hear from as many voices as possible. That's a nice start, but we don't need a campaign. We need a long, sustainable, embedded system, not only to protect you, but it's beginning to protect a very emerging entrepreneurial sector in China. So for those of you that may have the opportunity to interact with your colleagues there, I think you can applaud them for what they're doing, but encourage them that we want this to be systemic and sustainable.
Okay. Are there any objections to the letter? Hearing no objections, I suggest that we adopt it. Let's move on to the second letter then. Ivan, I'm always staring at you. You spent the last 3 days leading the business roundtable as its chairman, and now you're weighing in here, subcommittee. Thanks for your efforts. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim.
And we want to talk about tax policy.
Well, taxes are easier than intellectual property. We all know that. So Madam Vice Chair, and Jim, and Mr. Secretary, Ambassador Kirk. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be part of the PEC and work with you all. My role here is to suggest we introduce this letter on tax reform. Most of you have the letter in front of you. There are 4 key components to the letter. It's you know them all pretty well. Reduce the combined corporate tax rate to reach about the OECD level. You know that we're substantially above that at this point. Deal with this territorial tax system, create an international tax in which U.S. corporations can compete better with those in the OECD. Enact a permanent R&D credit that is competitive with benchmarks against the other OECD countries, and actually create additional temporary tax incentives, or actually try to make as many of those permanent in terms of dealing with investments in capital equipment. The central idea behind all of this is to modernize our system and incent substantial private sector investment. I think the facts support, the benchmarking supports making some changes. We appreciate greatly the dialogue and the conversation around these issues here, and we're happy to discuss any of these in any detail, Mr. Chairman, but we submit this for the
Okay.
Council's consideration.
Okay. And I think it should be noted that the President's tax proposal of a couple of days ago incorporates a start on a couple of these things, on the R&D tax credit and the other investment incentives, although I think the point we'd make is it needs to be permanent, predictable, long-term for it to really begin to influence behavior. And is that a fair comment?
Absolutely. No, I would, yes, let me just reinforce your point, Jim. I think for example, on the issue of the bonus depreciation and expensing, what a business does is if it has the opportunity to accelerate a project this year, it'll do it. What's more powerful is to look out over a 3 to 5 year horizon and say, what can you do over that time period, particularly industries that require 3 to 5 year capital horizons to do that. So what the President has done is terrific. I think we have an opportunity to continue this dialogue, increase the focus on this, and do some things that are even more powerful.
Any other discussion or comments? Yes.
Yeah, I just want to say on behalf of the Treasury Department that we appreciate very much the suggestions. We're always looking, as you know, we'd like to find ways to engage in dialogue about fundamental competitive. We're highly aware of the discrepancies between our system and our competitors' tax systems. We felt like this week's agreement was a very good down payment on that, but of course we're going to want to continue dialogue with you on it.
Thank you. No, perfect.
Any other comments on on Ivan's letter? Hearing no objections, I suggest we adopt the letter.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think Rob Henderson is going to talk about some collecting better data on services exports as a precursor to getting the arrow behind the arrowhead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
Let me briefly contextualize the letter, describe its content, which the letter is a product of the Manufacturing Services and Agricultural Subcommittee. First, a contextual point about the service sector, of which, of course, my company is obviously a part. Services account for nearly 80% of our country's economic output and accounts for 40% of our exports. This percentage disparity can be partly accounted for by barriers to services trade, and the disparity shows the untapped potential for the sector. It follows logically that service jobs account for over 80% of the U.S. private sector employment, and therefore is a sector we cannot afford to ignore or underestimate in the goal of doubling exports. When you consider the span of this sector, it emphasizes the important role of services in job creation. In addition, the services economy is an enabler and a multiplier in the agricultural and manufacturing sectors. For instance, banking, insurance, accounting, express delivery, logistics, telecommunications play essential roles in getting any product to customers. We actually have a trade surplus when it comes to service exports. So this is a true American success story. As we all know in our business lives, we pay attention to the areas of our companies that do well, and we make sure they have the resources they need to succeed. The same should be true of trade services and data connected to it. undercounting somewhere from 20 to $40 billion of services exports because we are working with one hand tied behind our back in terms of statistics. After impressing upon President Obama the reach and importance of the services sector, this letter makes two specific recommendations. First, it suggests that resources be reallocated or increased to the Bureau of Economic Analysis within Commerce. In this way, BEA would be able to expand and improve its coverage in its quarterly surveys and collect additional data. Second, by permitting data sharing between key statistical agencies and by allowing additional categories of companies to be surveyed, we could overcome a chronic underaccounting of the service sector exports. This requires a statutory change to the law. It's important to point out that while the agencies involved, Census, BEA, Bureau of Labor Statistics, would need statutory access to the federal tax information, it isn't the tax information itself they need, but additional categories of companies that are currently not supplied. These agencies already receive the relevant information, they just aren't allowed to access it for this particular purpose. There are simply exporters that aren't being counted because they aren't able to be surveyed. These actions seem minor, but they are the business equivalent of a public company failing to report fully to its decision makers and shareholders on the success of its most important product. We've talked about addressing the low-hanging fruit in terms of actions to take to improve exports. In this case, exports are there, we just don't know about them. So I strongly encourage the PEC to approve this letter. I'll be glad to take any comments or questions.
Any comments or questions for Rod?
Well, we very much appreciate that support for our agencies within the Department of Commerce, Bureau of Economic Analysis to coordinate with the other federal agencies and actually get that data and share the data and then make those analyses. And so we very much appreciate that. We talk about services. Services represent almost 80% of our U.S. economy. And you're right, we actually have a trade surplus in that area. I also want to point out that maybe Fred Hochberg can talk a little bit more about it, but XM does in fact finance the service industry as well. Maybe you can talk a little bit about it. But I'm going to also brag on behalf of Fred. In my remarks, I didn't cover some of the outstanding work and accomplishments that the XM Bank has been able to achieve this year at the close of their fiscal year. And Fred indicated a little bit this morning at the breakfast, but not everybody was there. But XM had a record highest ever $24.5 billion in financing. $5 billion of that went to small and medium-sized businesses, and under our calculations, all that financing has supported some 230,000 jobs in America. You know, this highest ever that closed in October, 24.5, higher, of course, than 2009. 2009 was the second highest in U.S. history, too. So XM has really done a great job. But Fred, if you could talk a little bit about the service sector and what you do to support that.
We only do, and I say only because I think we scratched the surface, about $2 billion in service exports. Usually they're part of a larger project where it would be the engineering services that would be part of it, or a power plant or a road project. We've done, there was a highway built in Dominican Republic. It was about a $360 million project. About 35 million was U.S. services, and we actually financed all the services from architecture, engineering, legal, insurance. As I said, so usually part of a larger project. We would love to find ways that we can reach more service providers, and particularly I think a lot of them are small businesses. And so as part of our outreach, we keep mentioning that, but I think it's a lot of smaller architectural firms, engineering firms may not really just aren't as aware of it. So whatever that letter can do in the data, we would like to support much more, but I think that we are sort of under supporting that part of the business.
Will, did you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that in support of Secretary Locke's efforts with the roundtables that are going around the country, I think we put together a program where we could integrate some internet marketing, some trade missions, some education and training around this idea. The small and medium businesses would rally around that, and the service providers like myself would definitely get the education and knowledge they need to move forward.
Okay. I think we should note the connection to XM. Any other comments? Hearing no objections, let's adopt the letter with the one modification.
Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Rob, appreciate it. Fourth letter, about benchmarking other economies, industrialized competitors like Germany, for example, that do a great job exporting, and is there anything we can learn? The only thing I'd add before turning this over to Scott and Jim is the German export machine, as an example. A lot of that is small and medium-sized businesses. So they're doing something that I think we can learn from, just as a kernel, and it can overlap on two of our very important initiatives. So, Scott, would you take it away?
Mr. Chairman, you did my introduction nicely. Seriously, we're hopeful this benchmarking will produce the best-in-class policy enablers that can be implemented in the United States. And Jim Immersion will walk us through the detail.
Yeah, Scott, I'll be very brief here. Scott and I view the substance of this letter as being advocating something that's fairly fundamental, and that pretty much, to be blunt about it, is knowing what the competition is doing. The letter says it quite a bit more eloquently than I just did. It talks about analyzing the changing nature, size, and effectiveness of government export policies, including export promotion and advocacy programs by foreign countries, but it means knowing what the competition is doing. And I don't think the letter is terribly controversial. It is built on the thought that having better insight to how other nations are assisting their companies reach global markets will actually help the administration, help Congress, help the general public to have a better understanding of the competitive pressures that U.S. companies and U.S. workers are facing. So if we need to change our policies, and I suspect we will in some fashion, public support is going to be necessary. And so without an understanding by the public of the need for a change, really informed by the knowledge of what other countries are doing, I think it may be more difficult to get the buy-in, to get the political support for either legislative or regulatory changes. I think we see that in trade agreements right now. As Ambassador Kirk has said, a lot of the hard work's been done on Korea, but there's a lot more hard work yet to go in making sure that both the people and Congress supports these agreements. This letter suggests a 6-month time frame for the study, that the study be publicly made available, and that the study include a cost analysis along with any recommendations. Again, I don't think it's terribly controversial. Perhaps it is somewhat fundamental, but it's something we're all thinking is very important, very beneficial. Ask for your consideration and support in sending it to the President.
Okay, like you say, a pretty fundamental concept. All we can do is learn. Any other discussion? Hearing no objection, I suggest we adopt the letter. Thanks very much, Scott and Jim. Appreciate it. Our Vice Chairman, Ursula Burns, is now going to talk about our final letter of recommendation, which is suggesting Russia WTO. We should get it done.
So, Mr. Chairman, on behalf of my colleague, Andrew Laveris, the Chair of the Competitiveness Subcommittee and the CEO and Chair of Dow, I am pleased to present the PEC's letter of recommendation registering strong support for the Russian WTO accession. The WTO accession is another meaningful way for the U.S. manufacturers can build demand for U.S. products and help incent job creation in the United States. Russia is the world's 10th largest economy and has been one of the fastest growing economies over the past decade. If we want to return to a growth trajectory, it is essential that the U.S. welcome Russia into the organization that ensures a level playing field on trade and provides appropriate recourse for any grievances that we would have. Russia's economy is expected to enjoy at least 4% growth in 2010 and 2011. With a highly educated population and a growing middle class, Russia has already become a valuable and profitable market for U.S. companies and for U.S. products. The potential for the sale of high-value U.S. goods and services into the Russian market is strong. A case in point is my company, Xerox Corporation. Russia is already one of the Xerox's largest export markets, probably the fourth largest export market, and the potential for continued growth remains very strong. But we need additional levers to help accelerate this potential, particularly interestingly enough in the services sector where a lot of our exports are growing. The elimination of tariffs on U.S. goods and products that come into WTO accession will help fuel further demand in Russia and for U.S. goods. The liberalization of the Russian economy will occur with Russia's accession, and the certainty of having Russia operating within global norms of the rules-making body of the WTO represents important opportunities for U.S. exports in a variety of sectors, including IT and most other major product categories. Russia is also making significant progress on increasing its IPR protection laws, which, as we heard earlier, is very important as well. Signs from WTO headquarters in Russia are encouraging, as Russia and the U.S. are working on remaining bilateral issues. Russia is similarly focused on outstanding multilateral issues with its other trading partners. Moreover, I understand that the administration is committed to repealing the restrictions under Jackson-Vanik. The PEC letter before us conveys the U.S. business community's strong support for a commercially meaningful agreement to be reached as soon as possible, and that Russia joined the WTO in 2011. I urge that we give this letter our wholehearted support. Finally, I would like to thank Andrew and the Dow team for taking the lead on this and preparing this letter for us.
Thank you, Ursula. I think we realize the WTO accession for Russia is not a simple issue. But when you frame it from the view of exports, it's something we really ought to try to get done. And so, Pastor Kirk, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, if I might, again, this is another example. I don't want to sound too USTR-centric, but we don't often get a chance to brag in public. But we've actually had a lot of and we've been making a lot of great progress. And again, Miriam Shapiro, who covers Eastern Europe, and that in addition to ACTA, spent the majority of the summer working intensely with Russia to meet a September sort of marker that President Obama and President Medvedev set following their visit last summer. And I would say that, to Russia's credit, we were probably 95% plus successful in terms of getting them to meet some of the outstanding bilateral issues there. So at least as it relates to the letter, I want to be careful. I can't speak to whatever the process might be on Jackson-Vanik. But with respect to your concerns about our resolving our issues, I would say we believe that we're in a very good place, and we have committed to work with Russia on their outstanding issues with other WTO members in terms of the multilateral forum. But in terms of your letter on our issues, we are in a very good, positive place with Russia, setting aside whatever happens on Jackson-Vanik.
Terrific. Any other comments? With no objections, I suggest we adopt the letter. Thank you. Now, we do have Jean Hale with us, and I think you started to give us a report today at the Exim breakfast. Could you elaborate a little bit for the benefit of everybody on your initiative?
Good morning, everyone. First of all, let me thank the SME subcommittee for all the hard work it's done. We have had 4 roundtables across the country, 2 in Miami, 1 in Miami, 1 in Orlando, and 1 in Los Angeles and Long Beach. The purpose of the roundtable is very simple. We're not there to reinvent the wheel. We're there to validate some of the reports that have already been done. And I believe that by doing so, we can have face time with people in order to dispel myth from perception and reality. So that's what we want to do. Then bring back some of the concerns to this committee. The most common theme that runs through the whole thing is resources. Of course, small businesses do not have the same resources as large corporations. And the reason these resources are very important is because you need working capital to understand the regulatory compliance of different countries. you also need to have knowledge of foreign markets. It costs money to do that. And more importantly, you have to have access to capital. Following that is the fact that we hear the complaint that the Ex-Im Bank process is too long. And I don't have any empirical data on that, but that's what we hear. And so working with these agencies across agencies, we need to have better coordination to make this process work, because what you need to do, if you're looking for money, you need to get this money fast, and you have to have speed. You have to make a deal, you have to have this money in hand to buy inventory, things of that nature. Otherwise, you're just going to be out there. One of the other things, too, that speaking with Secretary Communion last night, he brought up a good point. If this is appropriate, he said that one of the things that we have to also be concerned about is once a company gets product in country, you have all these other problems. Those problems are corruption, fraud, those kinds of things. So, do we have enough compliance officers in country to help small businesses deal with those things? My understanding is that worldwide we only have 12 compliance officers, and whereas I think that's pretty normal, to say the least, whereas we probably need about 1,200. So that's one of the things that I think that could be very important to helping small businesses to deal with problems in country. The other item is regulatory reform. One of the things that people want to happen is for the government to not become Big Brother, but to become a trade facilitator. And so those are the kinds of things that we believe that we can crystallize in a report and surround those with recommendations that we can bring back. Maybe these things can be done administratively versus having to go to the Congress to get them done. So if that's the case, then we can make some serious progress.
Thank you, Gene. Are there any, Garrett, did you want to make a comment?
Well, I appreciate Gene's comments, and I want to let you know that the federal agencies under this administration are really working much harder to collaborate and provide more seamless services. And both Ex-Im and Small Business Administration are focusing on streamlining their processes and applications and approval processes. I mean, Fred is very, very proud, and we're very proud that Ex-Im has issued the highest ever in financing 2 years in a row. And I know that Small Business Administration is now really focusing on helping companies, small, medium-sized companies that have never exported before, and we at Commerce are going to be focusing on those that already export. And in fact, over the coming year, we're all going to be going out to about 15 of the top metropolitan exporting markets to really inform those, especially small, medium-sized companies, of the exporting opportunities and the services that all the different agencies have in terms of financing, in terms of counseling, in terms of advocacy, our ability to just find and buyers and customers for made in USA goods and services. And then on regulatory reform, I just want to let you know that, for instance, SBA and the Department of Commerce have been teaming up so that we have more seamless delivery of services. And under Commerce Department, I think over the next year, we're going to be going out to about a dozen or more of our, in the major cities of the United States, having our commerce offices so that, such that if you go into one Commerce Department office, the people in that office will be cross-trained in all the services offered by the federal government to help businesses, so that you don't have to then go across the street or a half mile away to learn about opportunities at Ex-Im or Small Business Administration. Our folks will be cross-trained in all the different programs offerings, including defense diversification opportunities, Labor Department services, job training and retraining programs, so that it's a one-stop shop. So that because business owners, especially small, medium-sized companies, don't have the time to go traipsing around to different offices within a city or within a state to try and find out what's available for those companies. And I don't know if Karen can talk a little bit more about that.
Add to that, Gene, thank you for heading this up. As you know, this is a critical element because it's one of the fastest growing but most difficult to reach pieces of the export equation. I want to thank Congress and the President for putting in the Small Business Act that passed in September a very powerful set of tools for small business exporting. We have export financing, but we're now able to go up to $5 million. So a lot of the exporters couldn't deal with a $2 million cap. Now that financing is going to be available to them. And our special export programs also got enhancements, as did the on-the-ground coordinated activities that we do to counsel small businesses. If I might also ask you to promote the website, export.gov, for any small businesses that have an interest. We now have live a portal where a small business interested in exporting can register. So we'll be tracking their registrations and then pushing them towards the local assets. And we have coordinated, as Gary described, the SBA, the Commerce, and also in most cases the state local assets that help in exporting, and the XM assets. So we have a very robust now toolkit for small businesses who are interested in exporting, including online training, walking them through, and then connecting them up to the commercial attachés in the country. We're focusing at the SBA on new to export manufacturers, and the Commerce folks on the ground are focusing on some of the people who export but only to one country. And in that way, I think we're going to make significant progress.
That's good. I think, Fred, did you want to make a comment?
Gene, if you didn't find out that our service was too slow, then you would not have done a good job. We've reorganized actually in the last 4 months and put all the small business under one person. We eliminated a credit committee, so Senior Vice President of the bank can approve up to $10 million, which more than covers small business. And I think Karen makes a very good point. And before the limited SB, I think it was 1.7 million, and then we would do the top up to get them to 5. It's a lot easier now; they can get all of that in one location. But we also have, I think one, we're trying to really reduce our service time, cut at least in half. Cut it in about a third. We're trying to get it cut in half. We've come out with a couple of products that we're going to provide 5-day turnaround time. Because otherwise, I think small businesses particularly lose a sale if we're not getting them a faster answer. I mean, the president asked for a 25% increase in our budget, mostly to help small business. That's probably going to be maybe difficult to achieve in this environment, but we're going to find whatever.
It's clear that a lot of people are weighing in here on this priority. I think, and we all got to stay together to turbocharge it. What I respect about what Gene's doing is we have a term at the Boeing Learning Center called action learning. And Gene is going around to communities, meeting with people, seeing what's going on, trying to make recommendations as it all flows by him. We are going to make you harden up with a letter here soon, okay? And I know that you're going to want to have all these people with you when you make that recommendations, because their efforts right now are really moving forward, and I think we all want to do better. So, Gene, thanks for your leadership there. Secretary Salas, did you want to make a comment?
Yes, just for those of you that are interested, Department of Labor will be issuing in the course of 2 years or so, and beginning this month actually, at community colleges specifically for training. And we're looking at projects involving new technologies, IT, broadband, healthcare, renewable energy. And I would hope that we can try to bring a greater connection so that we work with our workforce investment boards that many of you here may be familiar with, and to really help to bring about a more robust program that will actually provide for a seamless opportunity for curriculum to match up with the immediate job requirements that are needed by employers that want to start up new businesses, but also to expand businesses. So I hope to work with all of you on that through our Department of Labor. We're really revamping, and the results, I think, have been positive.
Great. Thank you for that. Thank you very much. You know, Representative Teaberry, we've got you here, and a comment at large on any of these issues would be very much appreciated, if there's something going through your mind.
Well, I appreciate the leadership around the table in this group, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, but at the last meeting I made a comment that I will, I guess, reinforce in this setting. I want to again publicly thank the leadership of Ambassador Kirk and the work that he's done, stepping out and doing some courageous things. I will tell you, though, the reality on the ground in terms of the public on both the issue of trade and the issue of corporate tax reform needs a lot of work. There needs to be work around this table. There needs to be work with leaders within this administration. There needs to be work with leaders of associations of business groups that many of the CEOs and presidents belong to, because the public is not there. Is not there on trade, is not there on corporate tax reform. And if we are going to grow the economy, as the president, I was pleased to hear him talk about with respect to our tax code, if we are to grow the economy through exports, which also means trade, we're going to need a lot of work by people around this table. I can tell you that Dave and I, as members of the Ways and Means Committee, coming in the majority, you will find support among our members. As the new subcommittee chairman on select revenue, I can tell you on tax reform, I get it. We need to be more competitive globally, and part of that is through a more competitive tax code, but that doesn't make it easy. And so I hope that the message that I'm sending will be well received, that leaders in the business community, leaders within the president's administration, together with Republican House members in the majority next year, need to work together to build trust among the public that this is good for America, good for American workers.
One data point, because you're dead right from where I sit. I haven't led a discussion yesterday on this subject at the Business Roundtable meeting, and what it got down to is, it got down to local. It got down to mayors and governors. And engaging governors in some of this discussion, I think, might be something we consider along the way. And companies, people who lead companies, mayors, governors, people who lead companies, forming up on this issue. And Ivan's team is putting together some communication material for all of us. And we've taken on the task of local engagement on this issue, because I think that's where it gets solved. I'm not sure it's a broadcast medium kind of solution. I think it's a talk about the connection between winning globally and your job locally. You got to help there. I really appreciate your comment. It's important. So, are there any other comments? Yes, Gene.
With regards to the letter of recommendation, our strategy is to next
Okay.
March submit the letter.
Okay. Terrific. Any other comments on that? So we're not voting today on a letter, notwithstanding the fact that Gene has done more work than any of us. And that'll be forthcoming. And Ambassador Kirk, did you want to make a
I would
comment?
just add one more time. This is one of the mandates we got from Congress that was critically important to them. Likewise, we've created an ouster just to coordinate all of our assistance to SME, while Secretary Locke and Fred in particular are focusing on finance. We're looking at just the difficulty of small businesses to try to rationalize different regulatory schemes. We're doing it in NAFTA. There's a huge, as successful as NAFTA is, there's a lot of money left on the table for small businesses that just stop when you tell them, I've got to produce this in Spanish and I've got to produce it in French. And we've got to solve that problem for them. So I just want to assure you we're beginning to look at that under our NAFTA Commission. And then again, within the APEC and Trans-Pacific region, we're looking at everything we can to try to bring a little more regulatory coherence to what we're doing, knowing that for small businesses, if they have to try to work through that maze, for many of them, that just becomes a non-starter.
Thank you, Ambassador. You know, I just would like to acknowledge three people that have joined us. You all know who they are, but I think that they should be formally recognized. Valerie Jarrett and Larry Summers have joined us, and the new chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, Austin Goolsby, in his new role, has also joined us to participate in the discussion as we go along. Any of you like to make comments at this point, or are you going to hold your fire until we get to that point in the agenda? Okay. Gary, any further comments? I think we have about 2 more minutes before the president joins us.
Well,
And the last thing I want to do is suggest a break.
Well, I think, Jimmy, you've already touched on it, and Ambassador Kirk did as well. The whole notion of conveying to the American people the value of our exports. I mean, Ursula talked a little bit about it. I mean, we've got, each of the companies here have to really engage and inform your workers and your own communities as to the benefits to your communities and to your workers, and stability of employment, security of employment from our exports, and that you know, when you sell goods and services around the world, it generates jobs for the workers back home. And whether you're making the stuff here in America or you're supervising your operations around the world, that it's generating jobs. And perhaps Ursula, you can talk a little bit more about what you're trying to do. And I think you talked about a recent plant that you opened in New York and how you publicize that.
We did, and I'll do this before, or you can wait till after the break and do it. It's up to you.
Well, why don't you, you know, a comment along the lines you made at breakfast today, I think is very useful because it gets at the language that we might be able to use.
One of the things that we found is that, you know, obviously with any problem, any opportunity, communication is key. And precise, concise, local, easy to understand communication is key. And we are actually very sloppy in how we communicate our initiatives around trade. Most of the time, when we communicate, we find that people are confusing trade with outsourcing. And if I say the word trade, people actually think that what we're doing is outsourcing their work. It's actually 100% the opposite. And we just opened a plant, announced the expansion of a plant on Tuesday, where we put $25 million more into this plant. We'll grow the employment by about 10 people. We already have 75 people there. This is in upstate New York, a declining population area. Most of what we make in this plant, all of what we make in this plant, is not used in upstate New York at all. More than 50% of it is not used in the United States at all. So we added 10 jobs in upstate New York. May not sound like a lot, but this is a key thing. And the way that we pulled the press together, the reason why we did it was to explain that we're putting this money into this plant, sending most of these goods outside the United States, and it grows employment inside the United States. And simple language, real examples, I think will move making it local, as Jim said, will move the ball forward significantly. And it is our responsibility to do, and to take the time to educate our employee base, which we do at Xerox Corporation, the communities that we do business in, and the world and the rest of the United States about how important it is to export. Pretty simple, I think.
Yes.
I just wanted to add to that, and I was talking to Mary on the way over about companies indicating to their employees that they are exporters. But I think one of the important things is indicating to their suppliers that they're exporters, and that a lot of small and medium-sized businesses don't realize that they're exporters. We're actually doing something with Boeing to celebrate a success with them. And we've talked about not only having Boeing present, but some of their suppliers present as part of it as well. And I think that's the other message getting out to people that's even broader.
Can I add one more point?
Sure.
On this plant, I talked about the 10 jobs for Xerox Corporation. More importantly, we're using a local manufacturing plant operation to build this plant, obviously. So they are employing more people, and they're using 6 suppliers from upstate New York, and so they're employing more people. Exporting most of the stuff that's done, we've actually created a supply chain of jobs in upstate New York. And this simple story, I mean, we all have it. If we can actually make these little simple stories local and then add them up to a good global story, it would be, I think, very useful in moving this forward.
2 great points. You know, every time a 777 lands in Beijing, there's 22,000 suppliers that have access to the Chinese market that they wouldn't otherwise have. That's point one, and we got to articulate that better. And I think Ursula's point, you know, when you ask somebody, white collar workers often working for people like us, how do you feel about the impact of globalization?
Yeah.
That can mean outsourcing, or it can mean connecting job security to successful exporting, and that gets confused. And I think we got to. Glenn, did you have a point?
Yeah, I'd like to speak to the work that we're doing within the industry, Jim, under the direction of Secretary LaHood. In taking the message that competitiveness of the industry, the globalization of the industry, and our participation in it is a message that cascades down across our industry, yours, Scott's.
Yep.
And if you can get that message into the constituent base of the entire industry, including, as Ursula says, its supply chain, then you understand you have to be competitive at the essence to even be part of the conversation.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome.
Hey.
Good to have you here.
Good. Everybody have a seat. Have a seat. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for once again coming together to help us figure out how we're going to sell a lot of stuff all around the world. I want to thank Secretary Locke and members of my cabinet and administration. I want to thank the members of Congress who are here, and I want to thank Jim and Ursula, the chair and vice chairs of the President's Export Council, and all the other members here today for your extraordinary work. Everyone in this room is committed to promoting a strong and growing economy, one that's creating jobs, fostering a thriving middle class, and extending opportunity for all who are willing to work for it. And as we meet here, there's an important debate, I think most of you are aware of, on Capitol Hill that will determine in part whether our economy moves forward or backward. The bipartisan framework that we've forged on taxes will not only protect working Americans from seeing a major tax increase on January 1st, it will provide businesses incentives to invest, grow, and hire. And every economist that I've talked to or that I've read over the last couple of days acknowledges that this agreement would boost economic growth in the coming years and has the potential to create millions of jobs. The average American family will start 2011 knowing that there will be more money to pay the bills each month, more money to pay for tuition, more money to raise their children. But if this framework fails, the reverse is true. Americans would see it in smaller paychecks. That would have the effect of fewer jobs. So as we meet here today to talk about one important facet of our economic strategy for the future, I urge members of Congress to move forward on this essential priority. Now, the top priority of my administration since I took office has been to get the American people back on their feet and back on the job in the aftermath of the most devastating recession in our lifetime. That's job one. But as I said in greater detail on Monday, we've also got to ask ourselves, how do we position our economy to be strong, growing, and competitive in the long run? And one strategy that will help us do both, to create good jobs that pay well today and create new markets for jobs tomorrow, is to increase our exports to the rest of the world. And that's why in my State of the Union address, I set a goal for America. We will double our exports for goods and services over 5 years. And I relaunched this council because as business leaders and labor leaders, as members of Congress, and as members of my administration, I value your advice in terms of how we best achieve that goal. What we all agree on is that we've got to rebuild our economy on a new and stronger foundation for growth. And part of that means getting back to doing what America's always been known for doing, what our workers and our businesses have always done best, and that's making great products and selling them around the world. The world wants products made in America. We've got workers ready to make them. And the fact is, exporting is good for our economy. The more our companies export, the more they produce. The more they produce, the more workers they hire. Every $1 billion that we increase in exports supports more than 5,000 jobs. And companies that export often pay better wages. So at a time when jobs are in short supply, growing our export markets is an imperative. And growing our exports today will create the jobs of tomorrow. 95% of the world's customers and the fastest growing markets are beyond our borders. If we want to find new growth streams for our economy, we've got to compete aggressively for those customers because other nations are competing aggressively. And as long as I'm President of the United States, we are going to fight for every job, every industry, every market, everywhere, and we intend to win. That's why I set this goal. We're on track to meet it. Exports are up nearly 18% so far over last year. Today, I'd like to offer an update on some of the steps we've taken to get there and steps we're taking based on this Council's recommendations to keep making progress. Earlier this year, I launched the National Export Initiative, an effort to marshal the full resources of the federal government behind America's businesses, large and small, in order to best help them sell their goods, services, and ideas to the rest of the world. One of the things I pledged to do as part of this initiative was to move forward on new trade agreements with some of our key partners. And I promised to do it in a way that secures a level playing field for our companies and a fair shake for our workers, without compromising our most cherished values. That's why I am so pleased that the United States and South Korea reached agreement on a landmark trade deal last week. We expect this deal's tariff reductions alone to boost annual exports of American goods by up to $11 billion. And all told, this agreement, including the opening of the Korean services market, will support more than 70,000 American jobs. I hope to finalize this agreement. I had hoped to finalize this agreement when I traveled to Korea last month, but I didn't agree to it at that time for one simple reason. It wasn't yet good enough for our workers or our economy. As much as I believe that looking out for American workers requires competing in the global marketplace, I also believe that as we compete in the global marketplace, we've got to look out for American workers. So I said, let's take the time to get this right, and we did. It is now a deal that is good for our workers, good for our businesses, good for our farmers, good for our ranchers, good for aerospace, good for electronics manufacturers. In particular, American car and truck manufacturers will have more access to Korea's markets. And here at home, we'll encourage the development of electric cars and green technologies and continue to ensure a level playing field for our automakers. It's also good for our friend and ally, South Korea. They will grow their economy, gain greater access to our markets, and they'll also get American products that will be more affordable for Korean households and businesses. And that means more choices for them and more jobs for us. And it's good for American leadership. As I've insisted all along, the deal that we've struck includes strong protections for workers' rights and environmental standards, and as a consequence, I believe it's a model for future trade agreements that I will pursue. It's an agreement supported by members of Congress on both sides of the aisle and Americans on all sides of the political spectrum, from the UAW to the Chamber of Commerce. And I look forward to working with Congress and leaders in both parties to approve it, because if there's one thing we should all agree on, it's creating jobs and opportunity for the American people. Another thing that we said we'd do is to go to bat as a stronger advocate for our businesses abroad. This is an effort that I pledged to lead personally. And that's why on the same trip where we were working to get the Korea deal done, I visited India to highlight the role American business played there and took the opportunity to sell our exports to one of the fastest growing markets in the world. While I was there, we reached several landmark deals, from Boeing jets and GE engines to medical and mining equipment, deals that are worth nearly $10 billion in exports and will support more than 50,000 American jobs. I also believe that strong economic partnerships can create prosperity at home and advance it around the world. And that's why we focused on deepening our economic cooperation with Russia on a range of fronts, from aerospace to agriculture, including restarting American poultry exports earlier this year, which was an important victory for many American farmers. I believe that Russia belongs in the WTO and that we should support all efforts to make that happen. I think President Medvedev is doing important work trying to reform and move Russia forward on a whole host of issues, and I told him that the United States would be a partner with him in that effort. Welcoming Russia to the WTO would be good for them. It'd also be good for us and good for the global economy. Finally, we've also been working to reform our export control system with high-tech companies like some of yours in mind, so that American firms that make products with national security implications can stay competitive even as we better protect our national security interests. When this council met in September, some of you asked that we make it easier for businesses to participate in these reform efforts. So today I'm pleased to announce that we're publishing a first set of guidelines for what products should be controlled going forward and the licensing policies that will apply to them. As an example, we've applied those policies to one category of products. In that one category, about 3/4 of products previously subjected to stricter controls will be shifted to a more flexible list, and many are expected to fall off the list altogether. And we want input from businesses, from Congress, and from our allies as we complete this reform. Today we're also unveiling a new export control reform webpage as part of the revamped export.gov. This is something that Secretary Locke mentioned in our last meeting. Typically, all businesses that export have to go through a maze of different lists, different formats, from different departments to make sure they're not selling their products somewhere or to someone that they shouldn't be. As important as that is, the process is repetitive, it's redundant, and particularly onerous for small businesses without the means to navigate it all. So we're changing that. Effective today, businesses can, for the very first time, go to export.gov and download one consolidated list of entities that have special export requirements. So that's a lot of work that we've been doing to double our exports, to open up new markets, and level the playing field for American workers and businesses, all with the overarching purpose of growing and strengthening the American economy. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion we're going to be having as you guys continue your work. I'm grateful for all of you for being here because while those around this table may not always agree on every issue, what does bind us together is that we want to see our businesses grow, we want to see our workers get hired, we want our people to succeed, we want America to compete, we want to stay on top in the 21st century, and I'm confident we can do that with your help. So thank you very much, everybody, and I think you guys are going to strike this podium so I can sit down and listen a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hold our fire until he sits. Composite material. Composites. We have some extra. We thought they'd just turn Oh, yeah. It's actually safety.
I think you're all right.
Okay.
I'll get you.
Just, if I could, Mr. President, first of all, thanks again for coming. We're honored to have you here. We were delighted to see that reflected in your comments about progress over the last few months that some of the recommendations we'd made had found its way. I don't know whether we're getting out.
We're paying attention to it.
Yeah, I don't want to. We're either getting out ahead of your parade or one or the other. But nonetheless, progress is great. And I just wanted to spend 1 minute before we get into more of an interchange with everybody, just bring you up to date on what we've done today. 5 letters of recommendation are headed your way. 1 sponsored by Bob Iger of Disney. Intellectual property rights. Huge opportunity, some very specific thoughts. We discussed it, everybody's linked in. 2nd, tax policy, including investment tax credit and R&D tax credit, where you got out ahead of us. Although we would like to see them obviously extended, so more visibility for a longer period of time. But you'll see the theme that Ivan Seidenberg presented was about globally competitive other tax regimes around the world. That's the theme. You'll see that. 2nd letter, 3rd letter, we got into the services arena. a huge percentage of our economy, 75, 80% of our economy, as it relates to export. We need to build a database. We need to link in the people that put together numbers in your administration to give us the base to move forward. The fourth letter of recommendation, a very simple one, and this is a group of business people, so you would expect something like this. We want to benchmark some other nations that have export machines, where exports are a greater percentage of their economy. Germany is the obvious example, industrialized nation to the same degree we are. And the interesting thing about Germany is a lot of their export machine are small and medium-sized companies. So there's going to be some learning in there for us, and that was presented today by Scott and Jim. And then finally, in support of the WTO, Russia, Ursula presented, and we'll forward to you a letter basically supporting it and suggesting reasons why it's very important to the overall effort to double exports. So that's what we've been working on. It's headed your way, so we'd be delighted to sort of weigh in. I think the only thing I would just kick off the discussion, just you know, the theme of international engagement that is reflected in your comments, terrific. I mean, you see the progress on Korea, you see Russian WTO, you see your personal advocacy, State Department of Commerce, what they're doing. We feel a sea change, international engagement in many different forms, which I think is going to make a big difference. And I think just the on-the-ground perspective of companies around the table is the places like India, places like Korea, places like China, Japan, et cetera, they all feel it. They all feel the difference in the way we're approaching them. So I think anybody want to weigh in on that or anything, or would you just like to lead a discussion?
Well,
how do you want to work it?
I don't need to lead it. I think you guys are doing a great job. I want to listen, but I'll just make a couple of comments. First, in response to the list that you just laid out. IPR has obviously been on our radar screen for a long time. I think this is very timely, particularly because I've got a state visit coming up with China in January. I'll be honest with you, one of the challenges we've had on this sometimes is that it's something everybody's concerned about, but when we say, well, will you help us surface these issues? And, will you essentially be a witness? And suddenly, everybody.
Witness protection program.
Yeah, that's. Everybody gets a little nervous. So, but
adequate witness protection.
Right. But this is obviously a top priority, and I mentioned China not because it's unique, but because obviously the size of its market makes it a important partner in trying to get better enforcement. And we've actually seen them make some gestures towards improved enforcement, but I'm looking forward to seeing the specific recommendations. On tax policy, I have indicated my interest in dealing with the current structure. Is there a way for us to lower corporate tax rates, go to a territorial system, broaden the base? The challenge on this, and I just want to preview for you what I think is going to be a tough discussion, is how do we do it in a relatively revenue neutral way. It doesn't have to be dollar for dollar, but it can be a $2 trillion proposition, which a couple of the recommendations that we've seen when we've priced it out have just blown a hole through the budget. In these difficult fiscal times, we've got to do it in a way that means somebody's given up something. And so I just want to plant that thought in your head. The services stuff is great. WTO, Russia, I already indicated, we're pushing, and we're going to need help from this council and I think the business community on one element of that, and that's going to be Jackson Vanik. Those of you who aren't familiar, this is a carryover from the Soviet Union days. It was designed to make sure that refuseniks and Soviet Jewry were able to get out of the former Soviet Union. It's now lingered on for a very long time, and it's basically used as a cudgel for whatever Russia policy we're concerned about. And the intentions are always good, the question is this the best tool we have for dealing with some of these issues? And I'll be interested in hearing businesses' views on that. And then the last point I would just make, two last points, and then I'll shut up and I'll just listen. I very much like the idea of us examining what is Germany doing, because it's comparable. They've got comparable economy, and they're not competing based on low wages. So, I know Billy's shaking his head or nodding his head because, here you've got not only a high-wage workforce, a very unionized workforce, a very collaborative workforce, and yet they seem to be able to sell the heck out of stuff. And the question is, what are they doing right that we're not doing? Now, the size of the economy makes a difference. We've got such a huge domestic market that it's not realistic that we're going to be 30 or 40% of our economy is going to be export. Nobody's expecting that, but there are some lessons to be learned there, and I've already asked my team to start looking at some of these models. I think this group can do a great job helping us to learn some lessons. Last point is on the Korea Free Trade Agreement. I think we're going to get this thing passed, but I tell you, even as hard as we worked on this, as good as it is for American businesses, American workers, there's still just a lot of suspicion about trade deals. And so thinking about how we better talk about trade, market trade, that's going to be a major challenge that I think this group needs to engage in over the next 2 to 3 months, not just in the lead up to this particular agreement, but other agreements that may be coming down the pike. So.
Terrific. I think there's a couple of people that would like to weigh in on.
Good.
Bob, do you have some comments on IPR, Bob Iger, Disney?
Well, the extent of the problem in terms of theft is tremendous. There was a study done in 2009 that in 2007 about $250 billion of intellectual property product was stolen around the world. And it's a growing issue, and it's clearly getting in the way of growth. But your point was a valid one, Mr. President, that unless we're willing to be a witness, we're really not going to get much done. We've tried to hide under the kind of umbrella protection of industry organizations like the MPAA, but I've found over the last few years that can be less effective than the CEO of a company whose product has actually been stolen, sitting face to face with someone on the other side and giving them the facts. However, there has been retribution, and there probably will continue to be. So it's a fine line that we walk. There's no question about it. I think your point is a good one, though. We probably need to get a little bit less conservative about our willingness to complain.
Well, this is also, obviously, if we are, I think the first step is to give us the information. And then the second step is, are we, as chaperones, taking you in to have that conversation with the other country? I understand why companies wouldn't do it just on their own because there's a vulnerability there. But if we are there to shine the spotlight on it alongside you, I think retribution is maybe more difficult. It doesn't eliminate the fear, but it's more difficult. That would be very helpful.
We'll work hard on that one. Ursula, we spent about 20 minutes on this discussion on how do you sell trade. Mm-hmm. And Ursula had sort of did a nice job of summarizing that discussion. Just to bring you up to speed, Mr. President, maybe you could talk a little about some of the thoughts you had earlier.
One of the things that we find at Xerox Corporation is that we do business in markets everywhere around the world, and about 60% of our revenues come from outside the United States. Interestingly enough, about 40% of what we sell is produced inside the United States. So obviously we're producing to sell externally, which is a good thing. We have the largest footprint of employees in upstate New York, not a low-wage, vibrant economy. We made a decision a couple of years ago to site a plant, much against the advice of everybody, to site this plant in upstate New York because we had a large employee base there and thought we had a need to give them some hope and a future. By the way, the plant's doing extremely well. So well that we're about ready to expand it. We announced this on Tuesday. Expand the plant and almost double its volume. None of this volume, very little of this volume none of it is in upstate New York. Obviously, nobody in upstate New York is buying the products that we're selling. More than half of this output will be sold outside the United States. So 100% of the reason for doing this plant is not local. It is exported. It grows jobs, about 10 jobs inside of our company. That may not sound like a big amount, but in Rochester, New York, 10 jobs is a big deal. We use local manufacturing resources, a local company to expand the plant. They've used local suppliers to them to expand the plant. So with this small growth in exports, all exports, we've been able to increase employment in upstate New York. So now why is this bad news? If I say export in upstate New York or anywhere, the first reaction is that we're exporting jobs, that we're outsourcing jobs. What we did with this plan is we actually held a fairly large news conference for a relatively small event. The reason for the news conference was to educate not only my employees, but the local community, the local governance structure, the mayor, the governor. We had everybody, congressmen, senators, anybody we can get to this event in the cold of winter, snow on the ground, to explain to them that this little export-based expansion is about job creation. And Jim was talking about it before you came in. Communication is so important here. We are not very precise or concise or simple in our language when we're explaining to people why exports are a good thing. We said it earlier, 95% of the population is, you said it in your words, outside of the United States. The math is really simple. And I think if we can get down to the point where we use facts in local communities and expand those and communicate out with real data and real facts, I think that we'll be able to break it down little by little and be really precise in our words and clear about the fact that export equals jobs. Exports don't necessarily equal outsourcing. Actually, almost surely don't necessarily equal outsourcing. So I think it's an example of what the kind of work, the kind of missionary work that companies have to do to explain the goodness of exports and how it can help our economy.
Good.
Mary, you had a comment about your facility in Iowa.
Thank you.
More on the same point.
Yes, and great example from Xerox, fantastic. And Mr. President, I just want to say thank you for taking time to listen to us. We know your schedule is unbelievably hectic, so thank you very much.
I was thinking about taking the etching and all.
I'll tell you. There are just so many misconceptions, you said it right, so many suspicions about what's happening with trade, export, what does that mean? Does it mean we're losing our jobs? And I think the most important thing, to Ursula's point, is to really give the facts. And for instance, the Commerce Department has been tracking with our free trade partners, where were we in 2000? We were at a deficit. Where are we in 2009 with those free trade partners? We're with surplus. And in our company, we do about 30% export, and that's doubled in the last 10 years. And our employees know that 500 of our U.S. workers have jobs because we have the opportunity to export goods. In fact, we take raw steel and do the whole process and have finished goods at the end. And our folks know where those products are going. They know if they're going to Australia or they're going to China or they're going to the Congo or to Brazil. And they're very interested in that. They want to make sure they've got a quality product that ends up in the hands of a customer in Western Australia in a mining situation. And so for us, we've just really tried to communicate a lot to our employees. Again, we're privately held, or most of our employees are in one location in the U.S., so it's relatively easy. But I think the comment about also making sure we're talking the same talk to all stakeholders, including our vendors, is very important. And we've been on the lean journey for over 12 years and continuous improvement, always looking for ways to take out waste out of every process. And by the way, I'm delighted what I hear from various entities in your administration about doing that same thing, whether it's XM or Commerce, wherever it is going on is fantastic. But a little mantra that says, "In God we trust, all others bring data." And it's really, how do you get to the reality?
We have the same thing hanging on our door.
Right. How do you get to the reality of what the reality is and then make improvements? And so we need to share the right data and the right facts, and I guess I urge all of us around this table, from administration, business, labor, that we make sure we're sort of talking off the same fact book and then tell the story. And to Xerx's point, the local stories of how it makes a difference to our people. And I know we just had an employee year-end meeting, and a piece of it was we did a Mythbuster takeoff from Discovery Channel and took some myths, and one of them was meaning global means offshoring jobs, and we busted that myth, and because we had facts. And
This is all about.
we're responsible, but we are responsible for this in our own
This is
companies.
about mayors, governors, and people who run the companies. And so I think one of the things this council is looking at and may recommend is, how do we link into the community of governors and mayors in some efficient way that doesn't slow things down? But the most articulate voices on exports are often mayors and governors, because they get it. They're close enough to the action to understand this and that. And so we're gonna think about, is there some way to get a linkage there, and so that the perspectives that we're developing here can find a voice, not only in our companies, but in the local communities.
Well, but what's also important, I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
But Ursula's point about using events where there's an expansion, there's a ribbon cutting, there's 50 workers are being hired, because what happens is that when the plant closes, everybody knows about it. And when the plant opens, not so much. Or if there's just incremental additions to a plant that's already operating, not so much. And making those linkages, so at least people are saying both sides of the equation, that's going to be important.
Austin, did you want to make a comment in this area, or?
Sure, my comment would be more directed to the group. If the president hears too much from us already. I was just going to say three things. It's on this subject. I think it's not really selling it, it's explaining it. Because I think that in this case, the facts are most of the time on your side. And I guess I would just say three things. One, we got to do a better job in the government in the making of the policy that will make your job easier. So the vice president joked with Ambassador Kirk that if he could sign a trade agreement with South Korea that the unions like, the industry like, and get through Congress, he's going to nominate him for the Nobel Prize. Now he did. Now the vice president's got a technicality. Well, the deadline passed of when he can do the nomination. But we in the South Korea agreement, to address issues of non-tariff barriers is a major accomplishment for that agreement, because there are things that have contributed, in my view, to the general public distrust of the system. Some of them have to do with, okay, well, you sign these agreements, but it feels like we sign agreements and we open up our markets, but really they found some other way other than tariffs to keep our stuff out. So if we do a better job on that, if we do a better job on enforcing the rules of what you guys raise in intellectual property and these things, I think those make your job in the private sector of the explaining easier. My second point is, there's not a silver lining to have the job market in the dumps, but if there were a silver lining on this, it's that expansion is newsworthy. Now, to the mayors, to the governors, whatever. If you're opening a plant, if you're expanding 10 people, this is a thing which, in a boom, nobody pays attention. In a moment like this, if you say we're adding 50 workers, people are listening, and you have the opportunity to make a point. And then my third point would be, what are the points that one could make? Well, things that I'm struck with when we hear from you, both in these letters or we talk to business people. Not just what a significant share of growth is now getting tied to exports, as Mary said, but also that big companies are tied with small companies in their exports, and that whether it's if United Airlines is getting routes overseas, or somebody's opening hotels somewhere else, is feeding back to back office headquarters functions, jobs in the U.S. If you're expanding here in a way that you could make just a simple point, look, why are we adding 10 jobs? Because there's tons of demand in Asia, and so we need more people here to back that up. UPS, really, in most major businesses, they have that. That's helpful for you, but that's helpful for us too, because getting out of the zero sum, this is a war, and the only way to win the war is to make the other guy surrender mindset is important for us on the policy side.
Good, yeah, Gene?
Mr. President, good morning. One of the things that we have done on these roundtables that we've done around the country, we've done one in Los Angeles, one in Long Beach, one in Miami, one in Orlando. We have invited the mayors of those cities to participate, and it gets back to what you're saying, everything is local. And the reason why we want them involved is so they can help tell the story. More importantly, what we're trying to do is get them engaged in policing the efforts to have a regional plan. And I think that's what's needed here, a regional plan to help promote, because to me, listening to the SMEs, the story has not been told. When you think about 95% of the world customers outside the borders of the United States, apparently someone's not telling small businesses this is where you need to go. The information is there somewhere, I believe, but how do we get that information? So I think the emphasis has to be more on the outreach to those companies that might want to export, and also those companies that are exporting to one country, to understand the nuances about the new trade agreement that you just signed. But more importantly, you need a regional transportation plan. You need a regional plan that would also include infrastructure, I believe. Because, as an example, trying to get goods and services to the Port of Long Beach, for example, the Desmond Bridge is 99 years old. Well, the truckers, the small SMEs who drive the trucks across the bridge, they are concerned that the bridge might collapse and they might lose their lives. So it's a bigger story that we have to tell other than just the export side. The infrastructure piece has to be included in this. And so, but the local officials, along with the SMEs, has to tell the story, we believe.
Jim, did you have?
No, I was thinking about what Lawson said about, last thing he said is this is a war and the only way to win is to ask the other person to surrender or something. It's not a war, but it is very competitive. And I think that's something that, the letter coming to Mr. President on really studying what the other countries, Germany as a perfect example, are doing is really important. So that we actually think about the competition that's taking place. We do so in a very quick time frame. We do so in a very transparent way so that the people, not just the government, not just the business leaders on PEC, but actually people understand that it is competitive, building on the fact that 95% of the customers are outside the United States, and everybody has, their education level raised on this, because if changes are needed, they need to be supported by the population, not just by you, not just by us. And so we think that this will be very helpful to implementation of things.
Well, I just want to interject here. I mean, Jim's making an important point. For the last 30 years, what you've had is a debate that's framed in black and white. And that is, either trade is this unadulterated good, and any trade deal is good, and open markets are always good, and anybody who engages in protectionism, they're going to be hurt in the long run. So that's one school of thought. And then there's the other school of thought, which is trade's always bad. It's why manufacturing's declined, why we've lost all our jobs, and why we're no longer at the top of the world export market. And I think that everybody around this table understands that there are elements of truth in both stories. We just talked about how important exports are to our businesses. You know, Jim always makes the point that when Boeing sells a plane, there are a lot of small businesses, medium-sized businesses that are going into that plane that's being sold. That's supporting a lot of jobs. Our service industries, like UPS or our logistics or our financial sector, et cetera, that's supporting a whole bunch of back office stuff. So we know that story. But we also have to acknowledge that we opened up our markets to a lot of countries that at the time we opened them were way behind us, and we were pretty confident, well, if they're just selling toys or selling us t-shirts, that's not going to be a big deal, because we're still the folks making cars, steel, et cetera, et cetera. And over the course of 20 to 30 years, that asymmetry between what we were selling there versus what they were selling here exploded because of technology, globalization. They upped their game, et cetera. They moved up the value stream. And so now the reason this kind of sort of assessment, benchmarking is so important is I think it gives us an accurate story that says trade can be good, should be good. There's no reason why we can't compete, and we don't have choice but to compete. On the other hand, we got to be tough bargainers. We got to make sure that we're prying open other markets. The time has ended when we're treating China like Molly when it comes to trade arrangements. There's got to be a smart marketing plan. We've got to put resources behind it. What are countries like Germany that are doing high-end stuff? What are they doing? So what it will do, I guess the point I'm making is the American people won't buy it if you embrace one or the other story. And this is where data comes in, because then we can tell an honest story about, yep, there have been some times where jobs have been lost because our markets were open and the other side wasn't. We can start reversing that. And in some sectors, we run a surplus and we do real well. We sell a lot of planes and nobody else does. And our intellectual property, if it's protected, nobody does a better job than Disney or some of our other companies in terms of products that people around the world want. But we've got to be able to measure that stuff and present it to the American people accurately, as opposed to trying to spin them on ignoring the facts of a plant in their community that closed and may have moved somewhere else.
One piece of asymmetry is, I think, on balance, qualitatively, the people in many other countries know more about the United States and our market than our people know about their markets. It comes from encouraging education, and we have the best universities here, and so big numbers of students come here, they learn about it. So I think
that's a real good point.
Bill, before giving Rob a shot on services, Bill, did you have a comment on this one?
I did. Mr. President, you talked about Germany. A couple of years ago, I went over to Germany and met with the head of the union there that represents most of the manufacturing industry over there. And yeah, they do things differently. One thing that they pointed out, that they identified people, young kids, 7th, 8th grade, who's going to go into that manufacturing industry. And they've started training at that point, 7th, 8th grade, 4 years of high school. So when they come out to go to work in the manufacturing industry, they have 6 years of schooling behind them. So they are productive from day one. We've gotten away from that in this country. I remember 40 years ago when I went to high school, maybe 30 something.
It was 40.
But we had a lot of vocational high schools around the south side of Chicago. There were 7, 8, 10 vocational high schools. And you don't see them around anymore. People aren't trained to go into manufacturing. And over there in Europe, manufacturing, people that do the manufacturing, they're high tier. They're a good job. And we should have that here. We have good jobs in manufacturing with the big companies represented here at this table. But the small business, too many people think if they're going to go to work in small business and manufacturing, they're going to make a minimum wage. and it's not necessarily true. But we got to promote manufacturing industry as somewhere where you can go out and live that American dream. You can raise your family, you can send your kids to school, you can own a house. And we got to get more people trained, certified, and want to take these manufacturing jobs.
I think all of us have learned over the last decade, Mr. President, that labor cost is a function both of wage and productivity. That's the German lesson. You multiply the wage rate times productivity to get unit labor cost. And I think a lot of us have outsourced a lot, and I think we've learned some lessons, and I think we all are drawing the lines somewhat different place. We're all going to still be global as hell, but I think this is what I think, Jim, your initiative is going to, one of the things it's going to tell us. Rob, did you want to weigh in on services?
Well, I did have, Mr. President, this morning I had an example that was similar to Ursula's about the excitement of U.S. workers in our company relative to our expansion outside the United States. It's palpable, and but I just had a different thought. When you came in, I actually wrote it down, so I was paying attention to what you said. Even before as you were transitioning in, you said, well, we're going to talk about selling a lot of stuff around the world. And that resonates. And it made me think that, in the past, probably well-meaning and in a different time, we all talked about Buy America. And that was very much a national sort of a campaign. As time went on, I think Buy America, maybe unwittingly, became a narrowing concept in terms of our economic opportunities. So it is about not only buy, but sell America. And I wonder if we couldn't view this, because we've all talked about the lack of understanding in the general public, if we couldn't talk about something around the lines of like a public service announcement through the Ad Council to talk about, it is about buying and selling American, and it's about growth, and that we can tie that to our own experiences with our companies. It's been done well in the past. I mean, maybe it's different kind of examples, but whether it's Smokey the Bear talking about things, or littering, or using seat belts that people didn't want to use, whatever, with a little bit of understanding, all of a sudden now we just take that for granted. So we're part of the global economy, and I think maybe thinking about that, there's some good work that's been done there in the past. Maybe we can lever it again.
I very much appreciate that. I just got the hook. So, but these are all terrific ideas. Look, I will have probably my best bully pulpit at the State of the Union in about a month and a half. And my main focus, and I previewed this in a speech in North Carolina this week that some of you may have seen, is going to be exactly this topic. What does it take to make us competitive? We're not going to draw a wall around America. We're out there leading. That's what we've always done. We don't shy away from competition. We beat the competition. But we don't do it just by beating our chests. We do it by hard work and a good strategy. And so this is going to be a critical body for me to be able to work with to develop that strategy, and the data that comes out of this body, the recommendations that come out of this body are going to be very important. As you've seen, we take them seriously. We've already started implementing some of the recommendations you've made, and you haven't even been around that long. We're already taking all your good ideas. So because he finally earned his paycheck, I'm going to let Ron Kirk say one thing before I leave. He'd been sitting around loafing for 2 years. Finally got something done.
First of all, I enjoyed every minute of it. I was doing something. I just would say the comments of the group. Your choice of a mayor as USTR obviously was inspired. So that was one thing. No, second, look, we've said about the thing. One thing I want to assure you, we are reaching out to mayors and governors and the League of Cities, teeing them up because we're going to need them. Mayors are the ones that work with the chambers and the business on job creation. But I mean, you've heard the report of the group. There's a lot of synergy between what the business leaders have asked us to do and what we have been. One thing we haven't, and we haven't been applauded for as much, is we were able to gain the space and the credibility to get labor to listen to us because of what we've been doing the last 18 months, working with Hilda, addressing, re-inviting labor to the table. And a lot of people beat us up and said we gave labor a veto, and I told them no, but labor has to have a voice. But what we've done on that, what we did with enforcement, what we've done taking on China, we're going to continue to do, because the American public, when we talk about simplifying, the American public isn't at all attuned to global trade, but the American public's not crazy. They understand basic fairness and feel like we're buying from everybody else. They're closing their markets. They want to see all of these things. They want to hear about the jobs, but they also want to know we'll stand up and take on China, whether it's on tires or we take them on IPR. And so I think, one, we've got a good story to tell because of your leadership and because of the fact you did reject that false premise between the old way we used to look at trade, and we'll continue to do that.
Good. All right, Jim, Ursula, thanks for your
Thank you.
leadership. Thank you, everybody. If I don't see you, happy holidays.
Okay. What's that? You want to make a comment?
Let me just talk about the tax.
Sure.
Do you want to do something else?
No, we're, yeah, got that. I have a quick comment before we.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I wanted to make sure I had a chance to.
Ivan, can you speak up a little?
Yes.
Yeah, I will.
Sorry.
Everybody's shuffling. Right. I wanted to make sure we got a chance to address the tax issues while Larry and Austin are here. So if you could keep a secret, which I assume you can, what you'll see over the next several weeks is the business community indicating that the economy seems to have a little life to it. This is one of these indications where almost many companies are saying they're beginning to see orders, they're beginning to see a little bit of activity. And so the question becomes, how do you sustain it? The stuff that has been done, free trade, the tax deal, all the other initiatives that you put forward are very solid. So just let me offer, from the BRT's perspective, just a comment on this. Take something like bonus depreciation or any of these kinds of strategies. They're helping to stimulate a little activity. What's most important is to set these rules in place for 3 to 5 years. Because what you'll find is all these small businesses will react to what the large companies do in 1 year. But if we say we're going to have a program to spend capital over 3 or 4 years, it will have a ripple effect across the economy that's really extraordinary. So to me, the elements of what the President has proposed is terrific. Where you can create the certainty over time, you're going to get an even more powerful, I think, multiplier of that. The other thing I would say about the question I was going to ask the President is his comment about revenue neutrality. So this is where you create, not intentionally, this is where you have a discussion about uncertainty. Because on one hand, we do these things to create, and the next thing we do is we talk about what the neutrality is. So just a thought. For every incremental dollar of capital, incremental above what people would have spent, jobs get created. So if we can get comfortable that the business community, the administration, the Congress is showing the American people that we're taking a risk on the future of the country and we're putting capital to work, jobs will get created without any question. Just an example on the one you're just talking about. We're opening up a data center in a location in upstate New York, creating 300 jobs, right? Not a single transaction in that data center serves the U.S. They serve transactions in Latin America and in Asia. So we have people walking around that plant who think they're serving the Chinese or the Taiwanese or the Argentinians. And so I know everybody worries about the public doesn't understand. They get it. If you put a plant or you put work in their community, they're globalists about 2 seconds. I guarantee you. So the issue, it's not hard. We just do the work. So my only comment on this as we go forward, I think you guys have done great recently. I think we're moving in the right direction. Let's keep taking the uncertainty out of this discussion. So these planning cycles have 3 5-year horizons to them. Now, we have to figure out how to pay for it, I got it. But incremental capital will absolutely create jobs, no question. Ask any business guy that, and they'll tell you that.
Larry, maybe in your final comments, you could respond to that if you like, in part, but I think that does reflect perspective in the letter.
Yep.
So,
Thank you.
a couple of administrative comments here. Next meeting, Friday, March 11th, here. I think most everybody knows it. We're planning a coffee the afternoon before with Chairman Bernanke, and we're hopeful of a breakfast with Secretary Clinton in the morning. I think we have to get a little closer to lock that in. Second official meeting in 2011, November 16th. And depending on the schedule, we may try to fit in a short meeting on Capitol Hill with leadership during the summer. That's getting out there. It's a little vague. In the meantime, on December 21st, a great iconic American exporter, Harley Davidson. Bobby, where's Bobby? Bobby's here. Bobby, you're going to be hosting a tour. Try to highlight them. They're a real export machine, and it's a chance to see. And I think everybody will get a communication. If you can show up, great. Gene's next SME Roundtable in Iowa, beginning of February. I think you just mentioned that. Marianne Endringa is going to be leading that one in her home state. Nothing happens in Iowa. I get it now. Nothing happens in Iowa without, your football team faded, but the rest of you.
Personal.
You can tell the difference between Chicago and Iowa right there. Hey, we typically take during our cycle a trade mission trip that you're invited to be on. We're thinking it through. We're thinking about Brazil. Haven't firmed it up yet, but if there's any comments either on Brazil or on some other place that is not as supported by members of the staff, let me know. But I think we're forming up behind a Brazil trip.
Here on Brazil.
What's that?
Here on Brazil.
Yeah, I think I've gotten a lot of encouragement on Brazil. So I think that's what we're going to do. And that, we haven't decided on the date, but it could be late next year or early 2012. Is what we're looking at. So, hey, listen, before adjourning, I think Larry, right, this is Larry's last meeting. And I for one, I represent everybody. I'd like to acknowledge his contribution, not only to the administration, but to the country during an extraordinarily difficult time. Your steady hand, Larry, made a huge difference. We all get it. We all know it. And we're going to miss you. I know we can find you at the Verst House up in Cambridge, holding forth.
It doesn't exist anymore.
It went broke.
It went broke.
That's as Larry was down here.
Someone's going to tell me imports. In any case, Larry, I just, on behalf of the PEC, would just like to thank you for your leadership and your contribution. And we realize it's at least your third turn here in D.C. with this kind of selfless service. And, we all wish we could be as good. But thank you. So. Thank you.
Let me just make three comments, if I could, of just things I'm struck by in the discussion and answer Ivan's question. First, I think we always need to remember that trade is not just the export of widgets and other manufactured goods, and that will increasingly be the case. About 30% of Harvard's sales of higher education services to students go to foreigners. I look around and I see others here, and it's going to take longer to outsource Harvard than it is to outsource most other things. I'm wondering, listening to the conversation, whether we should start talking about the internationalizing of the American economy, because it's got the word American economy in it, and it smacks less of outsourcing. There is a huge set of opportunities, and as best I can tell, we are infinitely more organized to promote the sale of manufactured goods abroad, infinitely more organized to stand up for investment rights here than we are to attract patients to our hospitals, students to our universities, tourists to our resorts. It's something I know Dick Friedman has pushed on. It's something I've tried to push on. But we have not. There's important new legislation that Senator Reid legislated in the travel area. But I think it is the single largest opportunity in export promotion, and that commercial diplomacy for people to come here and do things is a vast opportunity. It implicates a lot of issues. It implicates the visa system, for example. But if you ask me as I leave what the biggest gap in our potential competitiveness agenda is, it is in that area. So I would just hope, and I know this group has been totally on board, but I would just hope that people, some folks in and out of government, would put their pedal, would sort of, get on it. Second observation, taxes. Nothing I say is going to hugely surprise you. I usually think of myself as young, but I was kind of active as an academic expert pushing things during the 1986 tax reform. So I guess I have a pretty long memory on this stuff. The case for investment incentives is compelling. Equipment investment in particular is highly correlated with economic growth. That's why the thing I personally worked hardest on in this latest tax deal was the expensing provisions, which, by the way, have the virtue that while they put money into the economy in 2011, they reduced the deficit in 2015. But, and there's obviously issues of competitiveness as we think about as we think about the tax system. But hear me if you want to succeed. Corporate profit, S&P corporate profits are 60% higher this year than they were 2 years ago, 60%. The country has a major deficit problem over the next 5 years. You will find massive enthusiasm in Washington, and you will find yourselves pushing on an open door if the business community as a collective is able to formulate a revenue neutral theory of how the tax system's competitiveness can be improved. If the business community formulates a wish list plus a bunch of claims about how economic growth will generate the extra revenue that do not score, that is not a strategy that, in my judgment, is very likely to get to the end successfully. And so the revenue neutrality here really is the coin of the realm. And I would just urge that those of you who I think rightly feel that there are enormous potential benefits from competitiveness pay close attention to the question of the revenue impacts of the proposal, and mobilize the necessary kind of advocacy that's fully analytic around that. And I think with that, there's a real chance of succeeding. Without that, I would be very surprised if at the end of the day, the effort to bring about reform was successful unless there was real attention to the revenue trust issues. Third, and last comment I'll make is that what is going to define, some of you have heard me say this before, what is going to define this quarter century in economic history, in all likelihood, is going to be the major change in the balance of economic weight from the rich world to traditionally rich world to the emerging world, and we just need to orient all of our strategies. I had a chance to speak to the new congressmen who were in an orientation program at Harvard, and I was asked to talk about trade, and I said to them, if you remember only one thing from what I say, remember this: the United States has a largely open market. Most other emerging markets don't, and substantially don't. When we enter into a trade agreement, you cannot fall very far from the basement, which is where we are. And therefore, the benefits are highly asymmetric, because even if you judge these things on purely mercantilist grounds, their trade barriers are falling much, much more than our trade barriers. If we could get that point out, that these agreements are as asymmetric as they are, and that will be much more true as we start doing business with the emerging markets, I think we can make a substantial contribution to the progress we're making. Or to put it differently, there's not a law right now that says you're not allowed to move to India, or you're not allowed to move to China, or you're not allowed to move to Korea. There's no law like that right now. A trade agreement isn't making it easier to do that. What a trade agreement is doing is making it easier to stay here and produce for there. So we need to find a way to change the debate about trade to whether agreements are good deals for America, not a broad referendum on whether globalization is a happy thing or not, because it's not going to stop whether we do or do not have trade agreements. What is going to be decided is whether we're going to be a serious participant or whether we're going to cede the ground to other countries. Those are my final three thoughts.
Weighty comments, and we will take them seriously. Appreciate that very much.
Thank you for your generous words.
Yeah, thank you. Secretary Locke, any final comments? Or
Looking forward to the next meeting.
declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.